Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Nazir Ahmad and I am from Pakistan. Today we will learn about 12 tips for getting your manuscript published. These tips have been written by David A. Cook. He has affiliation with Mayo Clinic Online Learning USA and Mayo Clinic College of Medicine USA. Previously, we have discussed from 1 to 6 tips already in part 1. That video I already uploaded in YouTube. So today we will learn from 7 to 12. Okay, let's start. Uh, these two tips from 7 to 8, they are part of getting the manuscript ready. Number 7 is select the right journal. Number 8 is follow journal instructions precisely. And the second part's like when you are rejected, what you should do. Get number 9, get it back out the door quickly. Number 10, take seriously all reviewer and editor suggestions. When you are invited to revise, respond carefully to every suggestion, even if you disagree. Number 12, get input from others as you revise. Tip number 7, select the right journal. You will naturally want your work published in the best possible journal, but the best journal is necessarily the one with the highest impact factor or the greatest prestige. Author says, in selecting a journal, I first consider the journal's readership. Is this journal followed by the people who will read, understand, apply, and cite my work? If not, then regardless of the journal's prestige, my work may not get the visibility it deserves. Journals usually publish instructions for authors that describe their target audience, scope, and preferences for specific topics and study types. Perusing back issues of a potential journal can further clarify the type and topic of articles published. Experienced colleagues can also offer field-specific topics. Second, I consider the quality and potential impact of my own work. Let us face it, some articles are stronger than others and will merit publication in a higher impact journal. You do not want to sell short your work, but repeatedly aiming too high will only result in repeated rejections. Each submission rejection cycle delays your paper's appearance in print, reflects wasted efforts on your part, and the journals requires you to re-immerse yourself in the details of a project from which you have moved on and generates increasing frustration and discouragement for you and your co-authors. An honest appraisal of your work merits, which may require input from a non-co-author colleague, will reduce both time and frustration. Author says, I will occasionally aim one step higher than my realistic estimation for my first submission, hoping to catch a lucky break. But if that fails, I immediately shift to a journal that I believe will be a reasonable match. Third, I consider the impact and prestige of the potential journals. This is not notoriously difficult to define. Quantitative metrics such as the journal impact factor, immediacy index, Egan factor, and article influence score all attempt to estimate impact, but all have notable deficiencies and norms are field specific. That is, the same impact factor value might be considered low in one field and high in another. Once again, experienced colleagues can help navigate journal prestige. Other considerations include the time from submission to acceptance and from acceptance to publication, publication fees, recognition of the journal by local peers, and restrictions on words or figures. Some journals have several month backlogs, while others will publish articles online ahead of print within weeks of acceptance. Local opinions about journal prestige should not be ignored, but remember that people may change their opinion when presented with new information. For example, data supporting the prestige of a journal within a field. And moreover, if your work is discovered and cited by others, this will typically carry more weight than the journal in which it was published. Tip number 8. Follow journal instructions precisely. Author says, as a journal editor and reviewer, I am frequently dismayed at authors' disregard for journal instructions concerning topics of interest, article type, manuscript length and required elements, abstract structure and length, reference citation format, and more. Failing to follow instructions creates an unfavorable first impression with the editorial team, and in some cases may trigger automatic rejection. Thus, the last thing I do, therefore, submitting is reread the author instructions and verify that I have fully complied. The only exception is that sometimes I will exceed the maximum number of references, although I have occasionally had to shorten that list during revisions. Most journals limit the number of words, tables, and figures. In general, do not exceed stated limits without express permission from the editorial staff, and document this in your cover letter. Most journals still require a cover letter. However, this can be very brief and focused. A concise but complete cover letter might consist of three short paragraphs, one each for authorship, article, summary, and potential reviewers. The only required element in most letters is a brief statement about authorship, conflict of interest, and prior publication. The 2 to 4 sentence summary paragraph should not recapitulate the abstract, which the editor is going to read soon enough, but rather should focus on the importance of this topic, the anticipated impact of these findings on the field, and why this manuscript is a good match for the chosen journal. It is usually helpful to suggest some potential reviewers, even if not required. Research suggests little difference in the quality of review from author suggested versus editor suggested reviewers. And most editors welcome suggestions because it saves them time and because you will probably be more familiar with subject experts than they. Second section P when you are rejected, what you should do. By following the first 8 tips, You successfully got your manuscript out the door. Unfortunately, since most journals accept fewer than 20% of the manuscripts they receive, your manuscript will most likely be rejected. You will naturally feel discouraged when you get that rejection letter. However, rejection is simply part of the publishing game. Most of the papers author says I have published were rejected by the first journal, and several had two or three rejections before finally finding a home. Yet I have seen colleagues hesitate to submit their manuscript to another journal because they feel discouraged after the first rejection. You should never give up after the first rejection. You have already invested substantial effort in getting the manuscript to this stage. That effort is wasted if you stop now. Get it back. Get it back out the door quickly. This is the 9th tip from section B. Get it back out the door quickly. Number 10, take seriously all reviewer and editor suggestions. Tip number 9, get it back out the door quickly. The rejected manuscript does you no good sitting on your desk. You need to get it back onto someone else as quickly as possible. Make whatever changes you are going to make. See tip number 10. Identify the next journal and submit. To expedite this process and to make the rejection less painful. At the time of initial submission, I often list the 2 or 3 journals to which I will next submit the manuscript if when rejection occurs. As a corollary, it is rarely helpful to argue with editors, especially if they feel the topic is not a good fit for their journal. Never resubmit a manuscript to the same journal without getting express permission from the editor. Tip number 10. Take seriously all reviewer and editor suggestions. In most cases of rejection, you will receive feedback from the editor, several reviewers, or both. Even though you are not required to address all of these suggestions, and I've heard some experts suggest ignoring the feedback on rejected manuscripts. I believe it is foolish to ignore this free advice. Moreover, if the same reviewer is asked to review the manuscript again by the next journal, he or she may feel offended if suggestions are entirely ignored. After a short cooling down period, rejection is always heard. I carefully consider all reviewer suggestions, prioritize each as uh, a essential, such as errors, omissions, or ambiguities. B. High yield. C. Easy and useful. Or D. Other, such as low yield or erroneous. And revise the manuscript to incorporate those in the first 3 categories. Tip number 11 contains additional suggestion for responding to reviewer feedback. This is the third section. See, when you are invited to revise, manuscripts are always almost never accepted without revisions. So, when you get an email stating we cannot accept it in its present form, but we would be willing to consider it again if you revise it to address the reviewer comments. That is very good news. However, you still have a lot of work ahead. as you make the required revisions. This section contains the last two tips. Tip number 11, respond carefully to every suggestion, even if you disagree. Tip number 12, get input from others as you revise. Tip number 11, respond carefully to every reviewer's suggestion, even if they disagree. The reviewers are always right, even if you disagree with their opinion or believe they are flagrantly wrong. There is always something that you can clarify, justify, or explain in response to their critique, and these changes will nearly always improve the manuscript. Reviewer comments typically vary, but just because they address different issues does not necessarily mean that they disagree. Outright disagreements between reviewers are infrequent. More often, reviewers simply focus on different issues that individually are all important and collectively will substantially improve the quality of the work. In contrast to rejection, following which you can selectively respond to high priority suggestions, in responding to an invitation to revise, it is essential to respond to every comment and suggestion. I classify reviewer comments into five types, namely uh, A. Recognition of poor writing, B. Identification of an error, C. Suggestion to elaborate on a theme, D. Opinion without suggestion, and E. Compliment. Each of these requires a different response. Three, these classifications and my response approach already have been discussed in previous two videos. Some journals request that changes be tracked or otherwise highlighted. If not, be sure to again remove all track changes and comments prior to resubmission. Be humble and respectful in the response letter. Remember that the reviewers gave freely of their time to read your manuscript and provide comments, and that they are nearly always trying to be constructive rather than disparaging. Even if you feel the reviewer is off base, it is usually possible to avoid a direct confrontation by finding and emphasizing areas of agreement, making a relatively inconsequential change in the manuscript text, requesting input from the editor, or playing one reviewer off another. Reviewer 2 suggested we shorten the introduction, but reviewer 1 indicated it was just the right length. We have elected to make no change for now, but would be willing to do so if the editor believes it would be helpful. To create a more favorable tone, it helps us to set aside the letter for a day or two. Ask a collaborator to read it from the perspective of the editor or reviewer, or imagine that the reviewer is a good friend and will see this letter, which might actually be true. Additional tips for an effective response letter include the following. Respond to every comment individually, except purely complimentary comments. Use white space, intended text, tables, and italics or bold font to distinguish reviewer comments from your response. Quote modified passages in full and or refer to the page number in the final manuscript where the text can be found. The reviewers are always right, even if you disagree. Tip number 12. This is the last tip, and it is get input from others as they revise. Do not try to complete the revision on your own. Share viewer comments with your co-authors and ask for their help in addressing concerns, especially the comments you find particularly challenging. If needed. Contact a non-author colleague for help. If you have concerns that cannot be resolved, though discussion with your co-authors or other colleagues, you may wish to contact an editor for guidance on how to proceed. Remember that the editor is your friend. He or she invited you to revise and resubmit your work and wants your response to be successful. However, be sure to follow proper channels, such as working through the journal's editorial desk rather than contacting the editor directly, and be respectful of his or her time. Thank you very much for watching my this presentation. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and press the bell icon button. To link to this article, please go through this TOI link.